Chapter 28, Steering Systems and Internal Steering Gears, or Integral Steering Gears. Day 3, Video 5, Tie Rod and Bearing Inspection. So the tie rod ends here. We've got the tie rod end here, and then it is threaded into the cross shaft of the going over to the other end of the axle. Passenger side over here with another tie rod. Coming over here, we've got a pinch clamp here with a bolt that would come through and hold that together. We've got the split in the middle here so that we can tighten or loosen that grip that the cross tube has on the tie rod end, and then we can thread that, roll the cross tube and thread that tie rod either in or out to affect the toe adjustment. So one of the things we need to be very careful of here is that we got proper engagement of this tie rod end into the cross tube. So as we look at the end of this cross tube, it's got a split in it. So again, as we clamp down on it, it gets tighter and it does not allow the cross tube to spin. If we do our inspection and we look under here in the lower example here, we've got a gap, so the end of that tie rod is right here, and now there's a gap in here, so we're not going to get the contact between the cross tube and that tie rod end, the threads, not get the surface area, and we may lose the adjustment because we don't have the clamping force to keep that from turning. So in the case either we've got a excessively worn out and we've adjusted the toe in or toe out excessively and we're now out of adjustment, or we've just installed a different tie rod end, or we have found that somebody's installed the wrong tie rod end and it's not the proper length for full engagement. So this would take this out of service. This loan here, so we can't have that. Then also here on our tie rod end, again, we've got the ball and socket type of a situation here, where if that ball and socket is worn out, we're going to have, it could lead to binding or play in the steering because of that. So again, we would check just with arm strength, lifting up and pulling down on that cross tube to see if there's any play up and down in that tie rod end. Also, while we're there, again, do an inspection, look for a tear in the boot, grease coming out or something like that of a hole in the boot. Wheel bearing inspection. So if we're servicing that steer axle and we're disassembling it, now's the time when we see that wheel bearing, take a look at it, see if there's any damage to that. So one of the things we'll look at is damage to the cage. So clearly what we've had here, we've got some damage to that cage. Probably what's happened is as they were moving the hub, the bearing slid out and then it fell straight down, and then the weight of that bearing falling straight down when it hit the floor bent the cage. So the problem here now is that we've got improper spacing between the rollers, which could lead to uneven loading, some heat damage and that sort of stuff to that bearing. If we saw this situation here, this bearing would need to be replaced. Second thing we'll look for is for pitting and damage to the bearings. Typically what a technician wants to do is to, in this situation we've got the bearing still all assembled, take his rag and wipe this off and then look at the roller segments to see if there's any damage. So clearly lots of damage on these roller segments, but that's kind of the most difficult way to look at that. So this is the bearing cup or the bearing race that would be in the hub, and then these rollers ride against that surface. So the easiest way to tell if we've got damage to this bearing is to look at the cup or look at the bearing race that's in the hub. So take your red rag, wipe off the oil or grease or anything off that surface, and if anything has damage that bearing, particles going through it, and we see all the pitting and stuff on those rollers, it's going to transfer all that to this surface that it rides on. So again, wiping that clean, looking at that surface, if we see anything like this with pitting or damage to that surface, we know that bearing is in the same condition and it's bad. We don't. It's a lot easier to see this surface than to try and look individually at all these rollers that are in the bearing. A couple things you can see some different colorations here, a little bit darker color from here down to here, and that's fine. You'll get that as the bearings are rolling across there. What we don't want to see is any kind of pitting or damage in that manner here where the surface is breaking down. Also different colorations, so this is just a slight shading, that's fine. The darker this shading gets, if we start getting into a light blue, a dark blue, a purple, or a black, those are all indications of heat, so heat damage in there. Again, another replacement of that bearing and the bearing cup.